Once upon a time, in the days when I was in college, I worked as a food delivery person for apps like DoorDash and Uber Eats. I didn't enjoy talking to strangers much, so I preferred bringing food instead of driving people. For a year, everything went fine, except for some customers upset over messed up orders. One dark Wednesday night with no morning classes, I thought to make some extra money and do a few more deliveries. After 4 or 5 quick ones, I found myself about 20 minutes away from my dorm. It was already 1 a.m., so I decided it was time to call it a night and head back. The way these apps work is simple. You drive around and wait for orders to show up. They tell you how much you'll earn and how far you'll go. Then, you choose to accept or not. As I was almost back at my dorm, I left the app open just in case a nearby order came in. A few requests came through, but they were too far to be worth it. Then, a new order appeared just as I pulled up to my dorm. It was quite a distance away, about 12 miles, but the pay was huge, more than I'd ever seen before. I thought about it. It was far, but the money was tempting. So I accepted. I picked up the order and checked the items at the restaurant. Strangely, the customer had ordered only 2 things, and the total was just a little over $6. This was odd because high payments usually meant big orders, but I figured they were giving a generous tip. During the drive, I pondered why such a huge tip for a small order. It was a bit weird, but I assumed they were either being kind or made a mistake. While the distance wasn't too far from my campus, I'd never been to that area before. The place was full of beautiful gated communities and big houses. Luckily, their house wasn't gated, so I entered the neighborhood. As I passed the houses, I realized the big tip made more sense. These were luxurious homes. The road was long, and I was almost at the house when the customer messaged me. They wanted me to be sure about delivering to the right address. I thought maybe their neighbor's house showed up on the map. When I reached, I messaged them asking if the description matched. They replied with a no. I waited for them to explain, but they didn't. I tried again with their neighbor's house description, and still, they said no. Frustrated, I called, but they didn't answer. I noticed the address had strange numbers on it. Googling it, I found the address pointed between 2 houses. There was a small garage-like structure there. I looked up from my phone and saw it for real, nestled between the houses. Determined, I walked over. Just as I was about to take a photo, a man appeared from the garage's side. He stared at me, making me uneasy. I pointed at the food, saying, "It's right here for you, sir." But he replied, saying, it wasn't where he wanted it. He pointed to the back of the garage, telling me that's where the delivery should be made. I felt something was off and decided not to follow him. I left the food by the garage and hurried back to my car. When I glanced back, he was heading back behind the garage, leaving the food. Driving back to my dorm, fear shook me. The whole situation felt strange. Days passed, and I couldn't shake off the eerie feeling. I didn't contact the police. I wasn't sure if he was just odd or potentially harmful. Eventually, I moved on and continued my deliveries. Nothing else happened, but weeks later, a big order came up, and it was in the same area. I declined immediately, wondering what could have happened to someone else who accepted that order, and as I pondered, the thought of that strange night lingered in my mind. Once upon a time, in a quiet town, I worked as a late-night driver to earn extra money. The busiest nights were Fridays and Saturdays, when everyone ordered food. One Saturday at 1 a.m., I got a request to deliver McDonald's to a guy named Mark. He lived nearby, just a few minutes away. I accepted and headed to the nearest McDonald's, which was only a short drive away. Mark's order was small. He wanted 2 hamburgers. His house was about 5 to 7 minutes from the McDonald's. Following the app's directions, I reached his home. His house was at the end of a dead-end street, right next to a line of trees that bordered a highway. It was a quiet night, and I didn't want to ring the doorbell, so I called Mark's number. After a single ring, it went to voicemail. Shortly after, I received a text from him asking me to come to the door. I stepped onto the porch of his big wooden house. As the door opened, I saw a man with a bald head. He looked quite young, maybe in his 30s, but he was completely bald. He greeted me and I noticed his breath was terrible. He seemed drunk too. Nonetheless, I didn't judge. Maybe he had a medical condition. Payments were usually made through the app, so I wasn't used to waiting for money. However, Mark asked me to come inside and place the food on his kitchen table while he grabbed a tip. I agreed, hoping for some extra cash. The kitchen was dimly lit by a small nightlight, and it smelled strange. I waited for Mark to return from the basement. As he took longer than expected, I began to explore a bit. I moved into the adjacent living room, where the TV was on, casting some light. The smell was even stronger here. I noticed that the back door was slightly open. I assumed he was trying to get rid of the foul odor, so I stepped outside onto the back deck. However, the smell intensified, and I heard the buzzing of flies nearby. Suddenly, a motion-sensing light turned on, revealing 2 large black garbage bags on the deck. The smell was unbearable. It didn't take long for me to realize what might be inside those bags. I hurried back inside, realizing that waiting for a tip was a bad idea. Just then, Mark emerged from the basement, holding a few dollar bills. He saw me heading towards the front door and asked where I was going. I made up an excuse, saying I needed to check my car. He handed me the money and turned towards the back door, noticing the light still on the porch. He looked back at me with a strange smile and asked if I went into the backyard. I denied it, and he stared at me without saying anything. Not wanting to stick around, I left quickly, but he grabbed my shoulder before I could escape. I shook his hand off and ran to my car. Watching his house from my car, I saw Mark run back outside, holding a metal rod. I drove away and called the police to report the strange encounter. The police arrived within minutes, and I directed them to Mark's house. They caught him moving bags that seemed to contain bodies into the backyard bushes. It turned out that Mark was not only deranged, but also not very smart. And so, the bizarre night ended with a chilling discovery, leaving a lasting memory of the strange encounter with Mark, a man with a dark secret. In a quiet corner of Texas, I worked as a driver for a food delivery service. Most of the time, I stuck to delivering in the cities, but occasionally I'd venture out to the countryside. One night, a job took me to a remote ranch that forever changed my mind about these country trips. Around 8:30 p.m., I received an order that led me to the middle of nowhere. Texas can be like that. Oh, one moment you're in a city, and the next there's nothing but emptiness around. Following a fence that bordered the street, I found the entryway onto the property. I followed the path to a large electric gate with a code pad. Since I didn't have a code, I messaged the customer for it. They quickly replied with the code 60066. Strangely, they added, "Welcome to the family." I typed in the code, and the gate creaked open. The path ahead was lined with trees, an unexpected sight amid the vast fields. It was eerie how quickly Texas scenery changed. As I drove down the path, a creepy feeling crept over me. I felt uneasy, but I continued. Suddenly, I spotted a pale man in a dirty black suit standing in the middle of the path. We stared at each other, neither of us moving. I rolled my window down and asked if he ordered food. He just pointed down the path. Reluctantly, I followed his gesture. Every now and then, I thought I saw more people in similar suits hiding behind trees. Despite my unease, I kept driving. Soon, a house appeared, but what I saw was a nightmare. Several men in dirty suits stood on the porch and along the driveway. My heart raced, and I couldn't move. One of the men on the porch had something in his hand. It looked like a rifle. I panicked and reversed my car to escape. Several men began walking toward me. Finally turning around, I slammed on the gas and sped toward the open gate. As I passed, the gate started closing. They were trying to trap me. Driving away, I called 911 and headed to the police station. When the officers went to the ranch, they found nothing. The property was abandoned for a decade. Confused, they couldn't explain what I experienced. Hours later, when I got home around 2:30 a.m., I received a text that read, "Where'd you go? It was just getting fun." That was the last time I ventured outside the city for a delivery.